What if I told you that before Sauron became the Dark Lord, he was merely the lieutenant of a far more terrible master, that the greatest evils of Middle-earth, dragons, Balrogs, and countless horrors, were all spawned by a single, primordial darkness? Meet Morgoth Bauglir, the first Dark Lord, and his most deadly servants, who nearly brought all creation to its knees. This isn't just about monsters and dark magic. This is about corruption, so profound, it twisted the very fabric of reality. Servants so powerful, they could shatter mountains and burn kingdoms. These weren't mere minions. They were apocalyptic forces that required the intervention of the gods themselves to defeat. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Tolkien considered Morgoth's reign of terror the foundational catastrophe of his entire legendarium. So hit that subscribe button. We're about to journey into the Elder Days and meet the most terrifying beings ever to walk Middle-earth. To truly appreciate the magnitude of Morgoth's servants, we must first understand the Dark Lord himself. Morgoth, originally known as Melkor, was the mightiest of the Valar, essentially a god among gods. When he fell to darkness, he brought with him knowledge and power that dwarfed anything Sauron would later achieve. Unlike Sauron, who relied primarily on cunning and the One Ring, Morgoth commanded through sheer, overwhelming force. His servants weren't just tools, they were extensions of his malice, each one capable of devastating entire kingdoms. The hierarchy he established would become the template for all future dark powers in Middle-earth. What made Morgoth's servants particularly terrifying was how they were created. The Dark Lord couldn't create life from nothing. That power belonged to Eru Ilúvatar alone. Instead, Morgoth specialized in corruption, taking existing beings and twisting them into nightmarish versions of their former selves. This process wasn't simple magic or temporary enchantment. Morgoth's corruption went deeper than flesh and bone, reaching into the very essence of his victims. He would take their noble qualities and invert them. Courage became cruelty, wisdom became cunning, and love became possessive hatred. The result was beings that retained their original power, but directed it toward purely destructive ends. Morgoth's servants operated on 3 distinct levels, each serving different aspects of his war against creation. At the highest level were his lieutenants, beings of immense individual power who commanded armies and governed territories in his name. These included Sauron, Gothmog, and the greatest of the Balrogs. The second tier consisted of his specialized weapons, creatures designed for specific types of destruction. The dragons filled this role perfectly, each one a living siege engine capable of devastating entire regions. These weren't mindless beasts, but intelligent beings who delighted in the suffering they caused. The lowest tier, though vast in number, were his foot soldiers and slaves, orcs, wolves, and other corrupted creatures. While individually less powerful, their sheer numbers and expendability made them a constant threat to the free peoples of Middle-earth. Before he became synonymous with evil, Sauron served Aule, the smith among the Valar, learning the arts of craftsmanship and creation. This background would prove crucial to his later role as Morgoth's chief lieutenant. When Sauron fell to darkness, he brought with him not just power, but the knowledge of how to create and manipulate on a fundamental level. Sauron's corruption was gradual rather than sudden. Initially drawn to Morgoth's promise of order and efficiency, he slowly abandoned his original values in pursuit of what he saw as logical solutions to Middle-earth's problems. This rational approach to evil made him far more dangerous than servants who were driven purely by malice. Where Morgoth was a force of raw destruction, Sauron became his instrument of subtle corruption. The Maya excelled at identifying the weaknesses in individuals and cultures, then exploiting those flaws to achieve his master's goals. He understood that corruption from within was often more effective than assault from without. Sauron's greatest talent lay in his ability to appear beneficial while serving destructive ends. He could present himself as a teacher, a helper, or a wise counselor, all while slowly poisoning his victims' minds against their own best interests. This talent would serve him well in his later deception of the elves of Eregion. Under Morgoth's direction, Sauron became the chief architect and administrator of Angband, the Dark Lord's great fortress. This wasn't merely a military installation, but a vast complex designed to corrupt and destroy on an industrial scale. Sauron organized the breeding programs that created new strains of orcs, supervised the torture chambers that broke captured enemies, and coordinated the military campaigns that devastated Beleriand. The efficiency with which Sauron managed these operations revealed a methodical evil that was perhaps more chilling than Morgoth's raw fury. Where the Dark Lord might destroy in rage, Sauron destroyed with careful planning and cold precision. One of Sauron's most feared aspects was his lordship over werewolves and other shape-changing creatures. He could take the form of a giant wolf himself, and under his command served creatures like Karkaroth and Draugluin. These weren't simply large wolves, but beings of supernatural power and malice. The werewolves served as Sauron's special forces, capable of infiltrating enemy territory and spreading terror among populations. Their supernatural nature made them nearly impossible to kill by conventional means, and their pack mentality allowed them to coordinate attacks with devastating effectiveness. Perhaps Sauron's most dangerous quality was his understanding of psychological warfare. He knew that defeating an enemy's will to fight was often more effective than defeating their armies. Under his guidance, Morgoth's forces became experts at spreading despair, breaking morale, and turning allies against each other. This expertise would prove crucial in many of Morgoth's victories. Cities that might have withstood direct assault fell to treachery and despair. Heroes who could face any physical challenge were broken by carefully orchestrated psychological torture. Sauron understood that the mind was often more vulnerable than the body. The Balrogs represented perhaps the most tragic aspect of Morgoth's corruption. These beings had once been Maiar, angelic spirits who served the Valar in various capacities. Their corruption into demons of shadow and flame demonstrated the depth of Morgoth's power to pervert even the most noble beings. The process by which the Maiar became Balrogs was one of gradual seduction, followed by violent transformation. Morgoth would first appeal to their pride or their desire for greater power, slowly drawing them away from their original loyalties. Once they had committed themselves to his service, the physical transformation would follow, wrapping them in shadow and flame. At the head of the Balrogs stood Gothmog, whose name became synonymous with military might and tactical brilliance. He served as Morgoth's primary general, commanding not just the Balrogs, but entire armies of orcs, dragons, and other creatures. His strategic mind was matched only by his personal combat prowess. Gothmog's greatest victory came at the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, where his tactical genius turned what might have been a defeat for Morgoth into the greatest disaster ever to befall the forces of good. His ability to coordinate multiple types of troops, while personally leading charges, made him virtually unstoppable on the battlefield. The Balrog's physical appearance was designed to inspire maximum terror. Wreathed in shadow and flame, wielding whips of fire and swords that burned with their own light, they were living nightmares made manifest. Their very presence could break the morale of entire armies, as ordinary soldiers found themselves unable to function in the face of such supernatural horror. But the Balrogs were more than just frightening. They were devastatingly effective weapons of war. Their flames could melt armor and weapons. Their whips could reach across battlefields to drag enemies to their doom, and their supernatural strength allowed them to smash through fortifications that would resist conventional siege engines. The Balrogs' affinity for flame and shadow made them particularly effective in underground combat. They could navigate the deepest tunnels without light, their flames providing both illumination and weapon. This made them ideal for assaulting the underground cities and strongholds that many of the free peoples constructed for protection. Their mastery of subterranean warfare would prove crucial in many of Morgoth's victories. Cities that seemed impregnable from above would fall when Balrogs emerged from unexpected tunnels, bringing fire and death into the heart of supposedly safe strongholds. Beyond their physical capabilities, the Balrogs served an important psychological function in Morgoth's armies. Their presence on a battlefield could turn the tide of a battle before it was even joined. Defenders who might have fought bravely against orcs or even dragons would often break and flee at the sight of a Balrog's flames. This psychological warfare was carefully cultivated by Morgoth. He understood that the reputation of his servants was often as valuable as their actual capabilities. By ensuring that stories of Balrog attacks spread far and wide, he could often achieve victory through fear alone. The first, and arguably most significant, of Morgoth's dragons was Glaurung, the Golden. Unlike his later descendants, Glaurung was wingless, but this limitation was more than compensated for by his other abilities. He was not merely a physical threat, but a creature of terrible intelligence and supernatural power. Glaurung's creation marked a turning point in Morgoth's war against the Free Peoples. Here was a creature that combined the destructive power of a living siege engine with the cunning of a master manipulator. His ability to speak and reason made him far more dangerous than any mere beast, as he could negotiate, deceive, and psychologically torment his victims. Perhaps Glaurung's most feared ability was his power to enchant and control minds through what became known as the Dragon Spell. This wasn't simple hypnosis, but a fundamental assault on his victims' will and memory. Those who fell under the Dragon Spell could have their entire identity rewritten, their memories altered, and their loyalties completely reversed. The most tragic example of this power was Glaurung's treatment of Turin and Nienor. Through careful manipulation and the application of his spell, the dragon orchestrated a tragedy that destroyed one of the greatest heroes of the Elder Days and his entire family line. This demonstrated that dragons could be as dangerous through cunning as through brute force. When Morgoth finally unleashed his ultimate weapon, it took the form of Ancalagon the Black, the greatest dragon ever to exist. Unlike Glaurung, Ancalagon possessed wings and could fly, making him virtually unstoppable by ground-based forces. His size was so immense that when he fell, his body crushed the peaks of Tangorodrim. Ancalagon represented the culmination of Morgoth's dragon breeding program. Every lesson learned from Glaurung's campaigns, every improvement in draconic design was incorporated into this ultimate weapon. He was not just large, but perfect in his destructive capabilities, combining overwhelming physical power with supernatural abilities. The creation of dragons wasn't a single event, but an ongoing program that spanned centuries. Morgoth's servants, under Sauron's direction, worked constantly to improve their draconic weapons. Each generation of dragons incorporated new abilities, greater size, and enhanced intelligence. These breeding programs revealed the industrial nature of Morgoth's evil. This wasn't random destruction, but carefully planned and continuously refined warfare. The dragons were biological weapons, designed and manufactured with the same attention to detail that other cultures might apply to swords or armor. The dragons served a crucial role in Morgoth's psychological warfare campaigns. The mere rumor that a dragon was approaching could cause entire populations to flee their homes. Cities that might have resisted the conventional siege for years would surrender rather than face a dragon's fire. This psychological impact was carefully cultivated and maintained. Dragons would often spare some survivors specifically so they could spread tales of the creature's power and ferocity. These stories would then precede the dragon to its next target, often achieving victory before battle was even joined. Even after Morgoth's defeat, the memory of his dragons continued to influence Middle-earth. The fear they had instilled in the people of Beleriand would persist for thousands of years, affecting how later generations approached warfare and construction. The very word dragon became synonymous with ultimate terror. This lasting impact demonstrated the effectiveness of Morgoth's strategy. By creating weapons that were not just physically powerful, but psychologically devastating, he ensured that his influence would persist long after his own defeat. Among Morgoth's most feared servants was Karkaroth, the greatest werewolf ever to walk Middle-earth. Raised by Morgoth himself from a whelp, Karkaroth grew to enormous size and supernatural power. His very name, meaning Redmaw, struck terror into the hearts of even the bravest warriors. Karkaroth's role went beyond simple combat. He served as the guardian of Angban's gates, a position that required not just strength, but intelligence and unwavering loyalty. His ability to distinguish between friend and foe, combined with his supernatural senses, made him the perfect sentinel for Morgoth's fortress. The creation of werewolves and vampires demonstrated Morgoth's talent for corrupting noble creatures into servants of evil. Wolves had originally been among the creatures that served the Valar, but under Morgoth's influence, they became instruments of terror and destruction. This corruption wasn't merely physical, but spiritual. The werewolves retained much of their original intelligence and pack loyalty, but these qualities were now directed toward evil ends. Their natural hunting instincts became tools of war, and their pack bonds became military organization. As the first and mightiest of the werewolves after Karkaroth, Draugluin served as both a military commander and a breeding sire for Morgoth's werewolf armies. His intelligence was nearly equal to that of the Mire, and his tactical understanding made him a formidable opponent for even experienced military leaders. Draugluin's campaigns were marked by their efficiency and brutality. He understood how to use his werewolves' natural advantages, their speed, their ability to track by scent, and their comfort with darkness, to maximum effect. His forces could cover vast distances quickly and strike without warning. Among the most mysterious of Morgoth's servants was Thuringwethil, a vampire who served as a messenger and spy. Her ability to take the form of a giant bat allowed her to travel quickly and undetected across vast distances, making her invaluable for coordinating Morgoth's far-flung operations. Thuringwethil represented a different aspect of Morgoth's corruption, the perversion of creatures associated with death and darkness. Unlike the werewolves, who were corrupted from noble origins, the vampires seemed to embrace their dark nature willingly, finding purpose in serving the powers of shadow. The werewolves and vampires served crucial roles in Morgoth's intelligence network. Their supernatural senses allowed them to gather information that would be impossible for ordinary spies to obtain. They could track individuals by scent across vast distances, eavesdrop on conversations from impossible ranges, and infiltrate areas that would be impenetrable to conventional agents. This intelligence network gave Morgoth a significant advantage in his war against the Free Peoples. He often knew his enemies' plans before they did, could anticipate their movements, and could strike at their weaknesses with devastating precision. Like all of Morgoth's servants, the werewolves and vampires served an important psychological function. Their very existence violated the natural order in ways that inspired primal terror. The sight of a werewolf or vampire could break the morale of even veteran troops, as these creatures represented a fundamental wrongness that the mind struggled to process. This psychological impact was enhanced by the creature's intelligence. Unlike mindless monsters, werewolves and vampires could taunt their victims, make threats, and demonstrate their supernatural knowledge. This made encounters with them far more traumatic than simple combat. One of Morgoth's most significant but temporary alliances was with Ungoliant, the Great Spider of Darkness. This partnership demonstrated Morgoth's willingness to work with powers that were, in some ways, even more alien and terrible than himself. Ungoliant's hunger for light itself made her the perfect ally for destroying the two trees of Valinor. The relationship between Morgoth and Ungoliant was never one of master and servant, but rather a temporary alliance of convenience. Both beings sought the destruction of the established order, though for different reasons. Their partnership allowed them to achieve what neither could have accomplished alone. After their alliance ended in mutual betrayal, Ungoliant's offspring continued to serve Morgoth's interests, though not necessarily by design. The great spiders that infested the dark places of Middle-earth created regions of horror that served as natural barriers and deterrents to Morgoth's enemies. These creatures, while not directly controlled by Morgoth, served his purposes by creating areas of darkness and fear that his enemies could not easily traverse. Their presence forced the free peoples to take longer, more dangerous routes, giving Morgoth's forces strategic advantages. Among Morgoth's more mysterious servants were the creatures that would later be known as fell beasts. These flying monsters served as mounts for the Nazgul in later ages, but their origins traced back to Morgoth's experiments in creating aerial support for his ground forces. The fell beasts represented Morgoth's understanding that control of the skies was crucial for military superiority. These creatures could scout vast areas, deliver messages across great distances, and provide air support for ground operations. Their terrifying appearance also served the psychological warfare function that was so important to Morgoth's strategy. The deep places of Angband housed horrors that defied easy categorization. These demons and lesser spirits served various functions in Morgoth's hierarchy, from torturers and executioners to specialized craftsmen who forged weapons and armor for the Dark Lord's armies. These creatures demonstrated the depth of Morgoth's corruption of the natural order. They were beings that should not have existed, twisted amalgamations of spirit and flesh that served purposes no natural creature could fulfill. Their very existence was an affront to the harmony of creation. Throughout his reign, Morgoth conducted ongoing experiments in the corruption and breeding of various creatures. These programs produced specialized servants designed for specific purposes, creatures that were living weapons rather than natural beings. These experiments revealed the scientific approach that Morgoth brought to evil. He wasn't content with random destruction, but sought to create efficient, purposeful instruments of his will. The results were often so successful that they persisted long after Morgoth's own defeat. What made Morgoth's specialized servants particularly effective was how they fit into his larger industrial complex of evil. Each type of creature served specific functions within a larger system designed to maximize destruction and suffering. This wasn't random evil, but organized, efficient malice. The coordination between different types of servants, dragons providing heavy assault, werewolves handling reconnaissance, Balrogs leading shock troops, and vampires managing intelligence, created a military machine that was far more effective than the sum of its parts. Morgoth's genius lay not just in creating powerful individual servants, but in understanding how to use them together effectively. His campaigns demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of combined arms warfare that wouldn't be seen again until the Industrial Age. Dragons would begin an assault by breaking enemy fortifications and demoralizing defenders. Balrogs would then lead charges of orcs and trolls through the breaches, while werewolves flanked the enemy and cut off retreat routes. Vampires would coordinate the overall assault, ensuring that different elements of the attack struck at precisely the right moments. Every aspect of Morgoth's servant deployment was designed to maximize psychological impact. The mere knowledge that dragons, Balrogs, or werewolves were approaching could cause entire armies to break before battle was joined. This psychological warfare was often more effective than physical combat. The coordination of psychological operations required careful planning and timing. Terror attacks had to be precisely calibrated to achieve a maximum impact without allowing the enemy time to adapt or develop countermeasures. Morgoth's servants excelled at this type of warfare. The supernatural abilities of Morgoth's servants made them ideal for intelligence operations. Werewolves could track enemies by scent across vast distances. Vampires could fly undetected over enemy territory, and dragons could use their spell-casting abilities to extract information from prisoners. This intelligence advantage allowed Morgoth to stay ahead of his enemies' plans and respond to threats before they could fully develop. The free peoples often found themselves fighting battles that Morgoth had already won through superior information. Many of Morgoth's servants were specifically designed for siege warfare. Dragons could melt gates and walls with their fire. Balrogs could tunnel under fortifications, and werewolves could infiltrate cities to open gates from within. This made supposedly impregnable fortresses vulnerable to attack. The psychological impact of siege warfare was enhanced by the nature of Morgoth's servants. Defenders who might have endured months of conventional siege would often surrender within days when faced with dragons or Balrogs. The supernatural nature of the threat made resistance seem futile. One of the most impressive aspects of Morgoth's servant deployment was its adaptability. When enemies developed countermeasures to one type of attack, Morgoth would modify his approach or deploy different types of servants. This flexibility kept his enemies constantly off balance. The ability to adapt strategies in real time required not just intelligent servants, but effective communication and coordination systems. Morgoth's network of vampires and werewolves provided the intelligence and messaging capabilities necessary to support this adaptive approach. The ultimate defeat of Morgoth's servants came during the War of Wrath, when the host of Valinor finally intervened directly in Middle-earth's affairs. Even then, the battle was far from easy. Morgoth's forces, led by Ancalagon the Black and supported by all manner of dragons, Balrogs and other creatures, fought with desperate ferocity. The scale of this final battle was unprecedented. Dragons filled the sky, Balrogs led armies of orcs across burning plains, and werewolves harried the flanks of the host of Valinor. The battle raged for years and reshaped the geography of northwestern Middle-earth through its sheer destructive power. The defeat in the War of Wrath saw the destruction or scattering of most of Morgoth's great servants. Ancalagon was slain by Arendil, most of the Balrogs were destroyed, and the great werewolves and vampires disappeared into the dark places of the world. Only a few, like Sauron, managed to escape and hide. This scattering, rather than complete destruction, would have long-term consequences for Middle-earth. The survivors would remember their master's teachings and carry forward his legacy of corruption and destruction. The seeds of future evil were preserved even in defeat. Those servants who survived the War of Wrath went into deep hiding, waiting for opportunities to emerge and continue their master's work. The Balrog that eventually confronted the Fellowship in Moria was likely one of these survivors, demonstrating that even centuries later, Morgoth's servants remained formidable threats. The hidden nature of these survivors created a constant undercurrent of danger in Middle-earth. No one could be certain that all of Morgoth's servants had been destroyed, and the possibility of their return haunted the Free Peoples for thousands of years. The most significant survivor was Sauron, who eventually emerged from hiding to become the dominant evil power in Middle-earth. His success demonstrated both the effectiveness of Morgoth's corruption and the enduring nature of the Dark Lord's influence. Sauron's rise was essentially a continuation of Morgoth's war by other means. Sauron's methods bore clear traces of his service under Morgoth. His use of psychological warfare, his industrial approach to evil, and his employment of corrupted creatures all reflected lessons learned during the Elder Days. The Second and Third Ages were in many ways epilogues to Morgoth's original campaign. Even after Morgoth's defeat and binding, the impact of his servants continued to shape Middle-earth. The fear of dragons persisted for millennia, influencing architecture, military planning, and cultural development. The memory of Balrogs haunted the deep places, making underground exploration dangerous long after the last demon had fallen. The psychological scars left by Morgoth's servants were perhaps more lasting than the physical damage they had caused. Entire cultures developed around the need to defend against supernatural threats that might no longer exist. The very concept of evil in Middle-earth was defined by the memory of Morgoth's great servants. The organizational structure and tactical approaches pioneered by Morgoth's servants became the template for all later evil in Middle-earth. Sauron's armies, the Witch King's forces, and even smaller threats like the goblins of the Misty Mountains all followed patterns established during Morgoth's reign. This continuity demonstrated the lasting influence of Morgoth's innovations in the application of evil. He had not just created powerful servants, but had established methodologies and philosophies that would persist long after his own defeat. The servants of Morgoth represent more than just powerful antagonists in Tolkien's legendarium. They embody the author's understanding of how evil operates in the world. Through these characters, Tolkien explored themes of corruption, the perversion of noble qualities, and the industrial organization of malice. Each of Morgoth's great servants, from the cunning Sauron to the terrible Ancalagon, demonstrated different aspects of evil's appeal and power. They showed how corruption could take many forms, from gradual seduction to violent transformation, and how evil could organize itself efficiently to achieve maximum destruction. The existence of such powerful evil servants also highlighted the courage required to oppose them. The heroes of the Elder Days faced threats that were literally superhuman, yet they continued to fight despite impossible odds. Their example provided inspiration for later generations facing their own, seemingly insurmountable challenges. The battles against Morgoth's servants established the pattern of heroism that would define Middle-earth throughout its history. Courage in the face of overwhelming odds, sacrifice for the greater good, and hope maintained despite apparent hopelessness. All of these themes emerged from the struggles against the Dark Lord's greatest servants. Perhaps most importantly, Morgoth's servants demonstrated the moral complexity that runs throughout Tolkien's work. Many of these beings had once been noble. The Balrogs had been Maiar, Sauron had served Aule, and even some of the werewolves had originally been faithful creatures. Their fall served as a warning about the seductive nature of evil and the constant vigilance required to resist corruption. This complexity made the servants more than simple monsters. They were tragic figures whose corruption served as cautionary tales. Their stories reminded readers that evil often wears appealing faces, and that the most dangerous corruptions are those that seem reasonable or beneficial. The influence of Morgoth's servants extends far beyond Tolkien's own work. They established archetypes and patterns that continue to influence fantasy literature and popular culture today. The concept of the fallen angel, the corrupted noble, and the organized army of darkness all trace their modern forms back to Tolkien's portrayal of Morgoth's servants. More broadly, these characters represent Tolkien's contribution to our understanding of evil as an organized, intelligent force, rather than simple chaos or destruction. They showed that evil could be efficient, sophisticated, and appealing, making it far more dangerous than random malice. As we conclude our journey through the ranks of Morgoth's greatest servants, we're left with a profound appreciation for Tolkien's vision of evil as both powerful and ultimately self-defeating. These servants achieved tremendous destruction and caused immeasurable suffering, yet their ultimate defeat demonstrated that even the most organized and powerful evil contains the seeds of its own destruction. The legacy of Morgoth's servants reminds us that while evil may be powerful and appealing, it is ultimately a corruption of good rather than a creative force in its own right. Their stories serve as both warnings about the dangers of corruption and testimonies to the ultimate power of hope, courage, and sacrifice. The next time you encounter Sauron in The Lord of the Rings, remember that he was merely the student. His master Morgoth commanded servants that make the Nazgul look like mere shadows. The Elder Days were an age of both greater evil and greater heroism, when gods walked Middle-earth, and the fate of all creation hung in the balance. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the darkest chapters in Middle-earth's history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Tolkien's most terrifying creations, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have many more stories from the Elder Days to explore together. Until next time, may your path lead away from shadow and toward the light.